Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this latest webinar within the Prague process. My name is Alexander Malev, and I welcome you from the ICMPD in Vienna, the International Center for Migration Policy Development. I am very happy to be here with you and with my team members, Irina Lusak and Julia Subotska, and especially also with Mr. Glenn Swan. Today's webinar will address the issue of return and reintegration, which is one of the thematic areas of the Prague process. We have been working on this particular topic between 2012 and 2016, and also more recently had a workshop on integrated border management and return in Kiev last year. We now plan to re-engage more actively on this particular issue, and I think Mr. Swan's presence here is a first step in that direction, but we shall also have more such online events and probably also trainings in the coming months. I'm very glad to welcome that many of you from so many countries to today's webinar. Please turn on the right language in the bottom of your screen. You can choose between English and Russian. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website in the coming weeks. You will also have the possibility to ask questions through the chat function of the webinar. You can ask your questions in Russian or English, and the Q&A session will be moderated by Irina Lusak. And we have 1.5 hours for this webinar. Glenn will speak for about half of that time, and then you will have sufficient time to ask questions afterwards. Let me shortly introduce Glenn. He has 8 years of project manager experience. He is a former colleague of ours at ICMPD. Until recently, he worked for the International Center for Migration Policy Development in Brussels. He was senior project manager of the ARIM program and managed 20 contracts and sourcing post-return assistance for returns from 16 EU member states and Schengen associated countries. Previous to his ICMPD engagement, Glenn worked for the Australian Department of Home Affairs and managed the Australian Assistant Voluntary Return and Reintegration program, building capacity of the Australian government to return and reintegrate migrants. Previous to that, he worked at the Department of Health and Aging of Australia, managing projects for aged care and cancer research programs. Glenn has a bachelor degree from the University of Queensland and also a graduate diploma in business and project management. He has published on today's issue, and he is also joining us right now from Australia. So Glenn, thank you for being with us. I know it's much later in Australia than it is here, but we're glad to have you. So Glenn, floor is yours. Enjoy the webinar and see you later.
Thanks very much, Alex. And I've got to say, it's an absolute pleasure to be invited to present to you on the topic today. Thanks also to Alex for reaching into my past and bringing to light some jobs that I did in a previous life. So thanks very much for that trip down memory lane, Alex. Ladies and gentlemen, I've got an absolute pleasure today to talk to you about return and reintegration programs. It's been a large part of my life for the last 10 years, and I'm really excited to present this information to you today. At the start, I've got to say a big thanks to ICMPD colleagues from the Prague process for making this presentation happen. Thanks also for your faith in my ability to present to close to 100 people today. Thank you very much. So I've got a really exciting webinar on this topic to share with all of you. And I want to start by providing you with a short overview of what I'm about to speak about. This will be useful for setting the scene for what I'm going to talk about for the next 30 or 40 minutes. What you can expect from this webinar. It's important right at the outset to say that when I say return, I'm going to talk about voluntary return. And some of you I know work predominantly with forced return, but it's important for you to know that today, when I say return, I'm predominantly talking about voluntary return. So that's the first important point. The second important point is to say today we're also talking about those return programs that link with post-return assistance. So if you like, we've got two major bodies of work. The first is return programs, and the second are post-return programs, and we're looking at that link between the two programs. We're also going to identify some efficiencies for what makes a good program and what makes these programs function best. And there's also going to be some time for some new perspectives as well. So I know some of you on the call today, you know a lot about return programs, you know a lot about reintegration programs, and it's my job today to introduce some new perspectives into the conversation as well, because nobody wants to hear the same boring old traditional program chat. There's got to be some time and space for new things as well. And it's got to be fun. It's got to be fun. So I've prepared a fun and informative presentation for you today. It's not just going to be me talking. Hopefully there's a few jokes and a few laughs, and we can have a great discussion at the end with some questions from you. An overview of the major points that we will discuss over the next 30 or 40 minutes. We're going to talk about what is return and reintegration assistance. And I know that some of you will say, well, why are we doing this? So it's a way of introducing the topic so that everybody's on the same page of where we're going to direct the discussion for the next 30 or 40 minutes. So what is it? The next big question is, why should we use it? Why should it be part of our migration management programs? We're also going to talk about current program features, and you're going to hear some new perspectives from me about how I've proposed that ICMPD can direct program features in a new and exciting way. We're also going to talk about major operational challenges, and I think it's a great way of saying that the discussion can't all be perfect, and it can't be talking only about good things for the program. We've got to acknowledge the challenges as well, and that brings in a good dose of reality. And then I'm hoping that you're interested in a short analysis that I'll provide on Prague process member state country programs. So I've examined all 50 programs, and I've done a short analysis, and there's some recommendations and some initiatives there to share with you as part of the discussion. Last but not least, I'm hoping while you're here is to hear about how to build better programs, which is the title of the presentation. So I'm not proposing that my points are silver bullets, but I'm going to propose some small changes that can perhaps lead to greater efficiencies for your programs. And then some conclusions, some final words from me, and the opportunity for you to ask some tough and testing questions of my knowledge. Okay, let's start, and let's start by talking about what is return and reintegration assistance. So like I said, there's a few people who are going to be on the call who already know about the topic, but for those of you who want a quick whip around on the topic, it's a simple explanation. We can break return and reintegration down into two major parts. Return assistance is easy. And so when you think about return assistance, you're thinking about what it takes, what assistance it takes to put someone on a plane or on a bus to get them home. And ordinarily you'd think about what requirements that you and I have when we board an aircraft. That you're going to need a ticket, and you're going to need some kind of identification in order to travel, and that's essentially returns assistance in a nutshell. Reintegration assistance is a little more complicated because it's based on the needs of the recipient. and that can differ from country to country, and it can also differ from person to person. And usually that involves a small amount of assistance for some people, and then also a larger amount of assistance for some people, mainly based on needs, and then also the time commitments it takes to administer that assistance. So I've gone an extra step, and I've broken the assistance down into 5 major categories, and you'll see them on your screen right now. And so if you like, the first 2 dot points could be categorized as return assistance, and then the 3rd, 4th, and 5th dot points could be categorized as reintegration assistance or post-return assistance. So there's a pre-departure commitment where there's an information exchange where travellers and people who need assistance to return home are given as much information as possible in order to inform their decision about return. And then there's the travel assistance itself. And then after the return journey is complete, there's the opportunity for these 3 phases of assistance. So reception assistance is on arrival assistance, usually administered at the airport. Post-return assistance is assistance administered in the days after the day of return. So, you know, maybe the first 2, 3, or 7 days after return. And reintegration assistance is something that stretches on for as long as 12 months after return, and usually involves cooperation with a trusted organisation to administer a larger body of assistance in accordance with the reintegration plan. And after all of that, you're probably wondering why I've included that acronym at the end of this slide. So AVRR, it's essential to mention AVRR at this time. It's universally the most recognised acronym on the subject and in the return and reintegration sector. And for those of you who need the long version of AVRR, it is Assisted Voluntary Return and Reintegration Assistance. So essentially meaning return and reintegration assistance in one package. So now we've established what it is. It's time to talk about why it should form part of a migration management project. And there's plenty of colleagues out there who will be saying, well, yeah, I know what it is, but does it really have a role to play in migration management? And there's some member states who have had it as part of their migration management programs for decades, and some member states who are relatively new to the idea of return and reintegration assistance as part of migration management. So I've assembled some points to talk about why return and reintegration assistance would be part of the program. And so there may be political reasons why this assistance is part of migration management. There's policy narratives that are built around the inclusion of this assistance as part of a departures program. And there's those narratives that are also informing, you know, dignified and humane return methods compared to forced return. So the reason why it's included could be political. It could also be diplomatic. There's times where return and reintegration assistance is used as a bargaining chip between sending country and receiving country. And it might be part of broader international cooperation objectives as well. And those objectives are something that allow member states to demonstrate a commitment to international migration objectives as well. There's also a dimension that says that to have a well-rounded return and reintegration program, it forms a vital part of migration management as well. So you may be able to accept some of those reasons. You may be able to accept some of those reasons, and if you don't, that's fine. But what remains is a reality, and this is I guess the way that I view the migration landscape, is that the reality is that some people need assistance to return home. So I think that there will inevitably be people who want to comply with departure orders, but they need assistance to depart, and that can be a small amount of assistance or it can be a greater amount of assistance. but I believe that there is always a reality where there is a role for some degree of return and reintegration assistance as part of a migration management program. And even if you don't accept that, even if you say, okay, Glenn, that's fine. I get the political reasons. I get the reality, but I don't accept it. And it probably means that you're an operational person. And I still think there's an operational reality for these programs. And that reality is that voluntary return is an alternative to detention and removal. Not that it responds to a threat of detention and removal, but it's available for host governments to say, well, if we're not going to detain and remove this person, there may be a way that they can self-manage their departure through a voluntary returns program. And that person may or may not be eligible for integration assistance. Moving right along. So our next stop is talking about current program features. And this is an opportunity for me to introduce my intellectual property that I've worked with ICMPD on to explain the four major components of a return and reintegration program. It's important to say at the outset that all return and reintegration programs follow a similar format, and assistance is broken down into those pre-departure stages, the travel stages, the reception assistance, and then longer reintegration assistance. My description of those four steps is called CPIM, and it's sometimes funny to hear how CPIM is translated into other languages, and it's being done right now. And sometimes the acronym sounds more dynamic in a language other than English. But let me take you through the major steps. So the major steps are compliance, planning, implementation, and monitoring. And we can examine those four steps in greater detail over the next slides. So firstly, compliance. Compliance means different things in different immigration programs. And it's important to say that when I use compliance today, I'm talking about how a program engages with an immigration caseload. So it operates on the principle that yes, there are people who need to depart certain countries, and a program needs to go and find them. And they need to find them and work out their ability to travel. And that compliance step, I think it rests on a foundation of identification and engaging a target caseload. So for a successful return program, I believe that program must work with a highly defined target caseload and inform its compliance work, and then find travellers who are best candidates for certain methods of departure, be it forced or voluntary return. So a lot of that is determined by policy settings. So some of you will be familiar with a legal framework that will sit around your migration management program, and then within that legal framework there's a policy framework as well, and the policy is what brings things to life. So although that there is the cold hard truth of the law, the policy settings are what really makes everyday sense for your officers who have to identify the target caseload and then work through the departure pathways for those particular people. When I say compliance, it also means the sharing of information about what happens next to people who are on the returns program. So for voluntary return, that means making sure that there's enough information to inform decisions about what happens next. So earlier I mentioned that component of a migration caseload that want to comply with departure orders, but need assistance to do so. And sometimes that assistance can be as simple as information about what happens next, and information about what happens once they return to their country of origin. So the first step, compliance. The second step is called planning. And this is where things start to get moving. And for the operational people on the call, this is where it really starts to get interesting. There's a key step, which is the first point on that slide. And in this step, we're determining someone's availability for travel. And it's not just, do you want to travel on a certain day? We're talking about whether or not that person can get on a plane or get on a bus, leave this country, and then be accepted in their country of origin. So identity forms a big part of determining availability to travel. And then there's other assessments that apply to people with medical ailments, for instance. And I do believe it is a universal term when I say it's a fitness to fly, or if that person is going to board a bus and return home by land, it may very well be called fitness to ride. Once availability for travel is determined, there is a selection of the pathway that person will follow. So there's a forced return pathway, voluntary return pathway, or a self-managed departure. And depending on the legal settings in your country, all three of those avenues may be available, or it might look a little different. Then the operational steps. Travel is booked, and then a decision in accordance with policy about departure and post-arrival assistance. There's also allowances for people who require particular medical assistance as well. The next step is called implementation, and this is a step that occurs on the day of travel. It involves elective transport to the airport. Some travellers will require assistance to the airport for forced returns. It will probably be in the back of an immigration car. And for voluntary returnees, it may be assistance with a taxi fare or an Uber fare to the departure airport. Some travellers will also require assistance to navigate the departing airport and also assistance to navigate the arrival airport as well. So all of those steps are taken care of pre-departure. And then there's an assessment about the eligibility of or applicability of reception assistance. And that's what we spoke about before, that is on arrival assistance in the airport, where someone may require assistance with their bags if they've been abroad for quite some time, or they might require an onward travel allowance so they can travel from a major capital city to an outlying city or an outlying town. And the last step in the CPIM acronym is called monitoring, and this may be of most interest to some of you because history tells us that it is very difficult to effectively evaluate these programs. And so I've listed a few options here for monitoring and evaluation. And then there's also the last point, which is my recommendation for effective monitoring. So you might choose start to finish performance. And that means from when a return process begins to when a post-return process ends. And it might be simple as saying from this point to this point, the events in between, we will create milestones and we will monitor how a recipient passes through those milestones and determine the effectiveness of our program. You may be interested in segmented performance. And when I say that, I mean that you might be interested in the end-to-end performance, but you may have a particular interest in post-arrival assistance or pre-departure assistance. And so it's a way of saying we understand the big picture, but we want to also focus on this one particular element because it's important to our government, for instance. You might focus on outcomes. So some of you might be familiar with the program planning tool called Program Logic. And it's a way that you can list the objectives and then you link those to outputs. And it's a very linear and very detailed way of designing a monitoring and evaluation framework. The next 2 points are traditional techniques from the sector. And no doubt some of you have heard about sustainable return. I particularly find sustainable return very, very hard to measure. Of course, there are ways where you can say, well, we're going to define sustainable return this way. And that is going to be the method for evaluating our returns. But I still struggle with it because it doesn't matter how good your program is. There's no way that you can control what happens in the country of return. So civil conflict, for instance, is a perfect example. Afghanistan is a perfect example of a country of origin that is experiencing some civil dilemmas at the moment. There is no way that a program can guarantee that person will stay in country just because it exists. There has to be another way of developing an evaluating metric or monitoring metric for the program. There's another way of measuring it, which is called effective return, and some countries use it to describe the start and finish of the return journey. And so again, it's a way of saying what's important to your government and what's important to your executive by saying if the return is effective, whatever happens after the return is something that isn't captured by the monitoring parameters. So you may like effective return. However, hello?
You're back then. Yeah, please continue.
Okay. Just let me share the screen again. I don't know what happened then. Okay, all right, let me continue. So my recommendation would be to build programs that sustain engagement. And that means for returns programs, you're looking at creating program settings that maximize the number of departures. And for reintegration programs, you're looking at creating settings that present the best outcomes for recipients. So rather than focusing on sustaining return and forcing it, if you like, my emphasis is on program design by saying, okay, right, let's build great partnerships. Let's build great compliance settings. Let's find ways of sustaining engagement with the programs as opposed to measuring the number of returns or the number of months that someone stays in country. Okay, right. So the next slide talks about major operational challenges, and those challenges are good to acknowledge. It can't be perfect. The programs can't be perfect. We need to talk about the challenges as well. And at the outset, you know, it's a really easy thing to say that voluntary return is not the same as forced return, and some people don't like voluntary return because it provides too much flexibility to travellers and recipients, but that's part of the territory. The next point is a big one, and it says that return and reintegration assistance does not guarantee departure, and that's also very important to know as well, that just the mere presence of this program can't guarantee departures, and that's the voluntary nature of its format. Even the post-arrival assistance, engagement in that assistance is voluntary, and there's no way of forcing participants to be part of that particular program. Travel documents is a universal challenge, so it doesn't matter if it's forced return or voluntary return or self-managed departure, the ability to identify someone and provide them with the necessary travel document will always be a time-consuming challenge. Some people will never receive travel documents and therefore they can't be returned. And some member states have ways to deal with that, but that will always be a challenge for travelling someone via returns program. One of the major criticisms of return and reintegration programs is that once you offer someone money as part of a return journey, it increases the opportunity to be accused of bribing that person to go home. And it's important that the program gets the balance right to say, okay, all right, well, we've acknowledged that this person requires assistance. We've made an assessment that these things are what they need for assistance, and we're going to offer allowances consummate to that. It has to be a match. It just can't be a pay-to-go program. And if you want to read more about pay-to-go, there's a sensational article that's out there by a guy called Richard Black, and he talks about pay-to-go programs and coercive returns. It's super, but it does provide a great insight about how to get the program settings right when you introduce allowances into the departure pathway. Measuring success of the program is really, really hard as well. And we touched a little bit on this on the previous slide, talking about sustained return. But it's important to work out how your program will determine its success. You can count the number of returns, you can count the number of businesses that are sponsored in the receiving country. Whichever way you do it, you have to be very, very clear about measuring the success. You can't just say, because of the mere presence of the program, we are sustaining return in Pakistan, in Sri Lanka, in India. It has to be more than that. Okay, all right. So it's time to talk about Prague Process member state national returns programs. And so I want to say at the outset that this isn't a serious examination of the programs. I looked at open source information that was available on the web, and I looked at whether or not there was any evidence to suggest a national program existed for all 50 member states. And I searched for AVRR, assisted return and reintegration, and I found a lot of information. There were some member states where I couldn't find the information, and it's important to say that even with the findings, that if I couldn't find the information, it doesn't mean that the programs don't exist. It's just a general indication of our program characteristics, and we can talk about it. So first up, I thought it was fun to share what I believe to be the best websites, and I'm going to produce a policy paper for Prague Process, and I can provide the web addresses if you want to let your fingers do the walking and examine the websites. This is according to me. So I looked at ease of navigation and available information, and then also the presence of videos as well. So I think Austria has a great website. It's very, very easy to use. There's a lot of great information. The information is available in a lot of different languages. I don't know if it's a new website, but I can't remember seeing this website before. So it's really, really good. And it only beats Belgium by just a little bit. And Belgium's website has been the benchmark, well, I believe it's the benchmark of websites for a long time. It's an incredibly good website, and it has a very good way of presenting a very clear message about return and reintegration assistance. And that's been my favorite until I saw the Austrian site. And now my favorite is the Austrian site. An honorable mention goes to Bulgaria. I think the Bulgarian website is really, really good. They call it migration or migrant life. It's very easy to navigate. It's got some excellent stories, and it provides a great summary of the national program. The Finnish website has been great for years. I think the Finns are really, really good at presenting very, very clean websites, and there's a lot of information on the site, but you wouldn't know it. It's beautifully presented, and the information is there, and it's very easy to find, and it's a great site. Rounding out the top 5, the Swiss website is really, really good because it provides some excellent videos and some excellent stories of return. Like I said, I'll provide the web addresses in a later publication, but I thought it was fun just to talk about the websites. Okay, what did I find? So it's interesting to note that 72% of Prague process member states have a visible program. That means when I went looking, I could find evidence of an outward return and reintegration program. So I wasn't looking for an inward or a sending program, or sorry, a receiving program. I could find evidence of those in a lot of countries, but I found 36 out of 50 countries had a visible return and reintegration program. The next statistic is really interesting. So of those 36 member states, 33 of you work with IOM. And so the AVRR product, is what I mentioned earlier. It's an IOM product, and there's an AVR program present in 33 of 50 member states. 3 member states self-manage a program. That means they don't work with an external organisation to get things done. And 14 member states without a visible program are all non-EU member states. I thought that was an important statistic for what I'm going to say next. So one of my major recommendations would be that there's a huge opportunity here to talk about more initiatives for Prague process non-EU member states. And the reason is that these countries have returns caseloads too. Even though those caseloads might be small, there's a migration management program in that country, and as part of managing that program, Voluntary Return and Reintegration Assistance have a role to play. And there's the ability for ICMPD and the ability for EU member states to work with their partners and share information and insights to build those programs where it's required. So of the non-EU member states, 9 non-EU member states have visible programs. So that's great. 7 of the 9 work with IOM, good, and 2 self-manage. And when I said earlier that we might want to build a program in some of these countries, there's some of these countries that already have really, really strong programs. And so I'm not going to name the countries, but there is a very strong demonstration of compliance. There's a great program that sits in the migration management landscape to permit voluntary return and reintegration. And that some of these programs have a good ability to move volume. That means that whatever number of departures are thrown at the program, there's the ability to travel a lot of people if that's required. So I wanted to provide some recommendations also, because I don't think this is just a lecture. I think you want to hear some ideas and some insights, and I wanted to say that there's a potential here for a joint solution for non-EU Prague process member states. ICMPD with Prague process is perfectly positioned to lead further discussion on this topic. there's the ability to centralise some functions to achieve economies of scale, and that will provide some better return on investment for low volume caseloads. So that in a nutshell is the idea, and there's the ability for the Prague process colleagues to work with interested member states to talk further. So I don't think you're just attending the webinar to hear about pre-departure assistance or reintegration assistance. I think you want to hear what I have to say when I say how to build better programs. So here's some points that I can share that might make a difference to your programs in whichever part of the world they're in. So the first two are quite obvious. So increasing policy control, it's a hot topic because sometimes member states entrust too much responsibility on external organisations to decide how their program functions, and there may not be an immediate danger in doing that because there's a lot of knowledge there, there's a lot of working expertise, but you want to be sure that the program can do exactly what you want it to do, and you don't want an external organisation deciding how your program works. You want to decide how that works, and so it's very important in the beginning to say, okay, all right, away from that external organisation, what's the policy settings? How do we want this program to work? And then once you've decided the policy settings, you can go into how do we control the program. And so again, there may be advantages of outsourcing some of that program to an external organisation, but the best programs, they in-house some aspects of the program just to maintain that control. Some programs in some countries even say, well, if that external organisation can't achieve that departure, we'll do the departure ourselves. And that's not a forced return. That's a voluntary return of a different definition. You might increase the customised features of the program. And there are some EU member states who have done this quite well, where they've got a general program, but within that general program, they've built very, very specific programs for instance, supporting returns to Kosovo, for instance. And then, there's other examples to other parts of the world. So Ethiopia is really hot at the moment. There's a lot of Ethiopian nationals who aren't having a good time abroad, and they need assistance to return home. And so customizing part of the program might say, well, we've got a government objective that says we want to assist this particular nationality, and you build a customized program for that nationality. We spoke before about in-housing more program functions. In-housing is a great way of increasing control. And that would probably be my #1 recommendation for building better programs. I used to work on a national program that outsourced as good as 100% of the responsibility for its national returns program to an external organisation. And they even outsourced policy control at one stage. So bringing those functions back in-house under the control of your immigration department, under the control of your government, would be a great first step of building a better program. In the operational space, there's always the ability to seek operational alliances. And so I know those alliances are out there, and I know member states do work together to achieve returns to certain parts of the world. And those alliances are great because it provides a joint solution, a cost-saving solution. It also allows for information exchange on priority countries of return. It could also assist with the choice of service partners. And so when I say service partners, it means that if you've got to charter a plane, who charters the plane? If you've got to provide escorts, who provides the escorts? If you've got to provide post-return assistance, which organisation is your trusted partner to provide that post-return assistance? And that is also something that could form part of the next steps for ICMPD dialogue on this topic. And if all else fails, I believe a way to build a better voluntary returns program is to increase the visibility of forced returns. And this could be a contentious recommendation for the humanitarians on the call, but it's a way of saying that there's an inseparable relationship between forced and voluntary return, and a strong forced return program without doubt increases subscription to voluntary returns programs. Okay, we made it. This is the last slide before I hand back to my Prague process colleagues, and we hear some questions from you. These are my conclusions. So if you were asleep for the last 40 minutes and you're just waking up because I said this is the end, these would be my major points from the presentation. That for these programs, it's really important to have clear policy objectives. The ability to misuse these programs is very, very high. And so as a government, as a host government, it's very important to decide how you want these programs to work in practice. Once you've got clear policy objectives, it's also very important to link those policy objectives to program design. So it's no good just having those policy objectives sit in an office somewhere. They have to be visible in program work on the ground. The third point is a shout out for customized solutions. And I'm thinking about work that I did for a particular member state in the last 2 years, where that member state wanted program settings that were customized for their immigration environment. So it was a way of saying that generalized programs won't work, and we want to build a program that's specifically for us. And by doing that, I think it's a great way of increasing control and delivering on a great result for government and a great result for donors as well. Last but not least, there's the benefit of joint solutions. And I do believe that there is a future for this topic, particularly with non-EU member states, those willing member states, where joint solutions can be shared between EU and non-EU. It doesn't have to be an operational alliance, but it's a way of saying this is a way that we can increase the information sharing on the topic to provide better programs and to provide better results. So Prague process colleagues, that's all I have to say as part of my presentation. To participants, thanks very much for your attention, and I'm willing to hear any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Glenn. I think that was a very comprehensive presentation, and sorry also for the technical interruption, but as I said before, Glenn is sitting in Australia, so we're lucky that it was just a short break. I already see the first question, but maybe in order to leave some more time to our listeners to ask their questions, let me start with something that is probably on all our minds these days, namely the coronavirus pandemic. And may I ask you to briefly comment how this has impacted return operations over the past months? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the first question, Alex. It's one that a lot of participants on the call will already know the answer to, and that COVID stopped everything, or most things in the world, including returns. So the ability for people to move has been greatly affected by the COVID parameters or the COVID restrictions in host countries. But then also there's some countries of origin or countries of return that aren't having a good time with COVID at the moment. So Afghanistan, it got to mention earlier, Iran is not having a good time with COVID. India is not having a good time at all with COVID, and it does affect people's willingness to return as well. So, you know, you take travel ability away, and you take opportunity away in countries of return, and consequently people don't want to leave. It's also really good to see that a lot of host countries during COVID have suspended return operations as well. And I think that's a really strong statement for the humanitarian world to say, well, it would be inhumane for some people to travel at this time. So we're not going to pursue returns. Slowly things are getting back to normal though. And maybe things will return to semi-normal towards the end of the year or early 2021.
Thank you. We already had a comment for you to please share the links to the different country websites. And as usual, we will send Glenn's presentation to all our listeners through a follow-up email. So hopefully Glenn will also share those links with us and we could include them in this email. Otherwise, Glenn already mentioned that he's about to write a policy brief for the Prague Process Migration Observatory, and this shall hopefully also be available in about a month or so. We, of course, have to also translate it into Russian. And now I would invite all listeners to ask their questions through the chat function in both English and Russian, and I leave the floor to Irina and Glenn for the Q&A session. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Glenn. That was a perfect presentation. I think you outlined some of the interesting ideas, also how their perfect or better return program can work in reality. So could you, Elena Sadovskaya is asking whether you could elaborate a little bit more on the difference between sustainable and effective return, because it wasn't clear enough from the presentation.
No problem. And even if it's not clear enough with my spoken answers, I'm happy to provide more explanation in writing afterwards. Okay, so sustainable return and effective return. So sustainable return, if you were to Google sustainable return, there's a whole lot of literature available on what constitutes sustainable return. And so what it means is that after return is complete, the assistance sustains that person's time in country. And the program, Reintegration Assistance, it says, okay, all right, the maximum amount of assistance that's available is 12 months worth of assistance. So if you like, if a person participates in one of these programs, we're looking to sustain return for at least 12 months. Now, my problem with the measure is that on the day after 12 months following a return, if that person has to further migrate for any reason, the measure fails, and it's not as effective as it could be. However, there's been a lot of time and a lot of expertise invested in defining sustainable return. There's even a sustainable return metric that's available for use. So it does serve a purpose in some time, but in short, sustainable return means after return, is there enough assistance to sustain that person's time in that country of return? Now, effective return is essentially talking about travel, and effective return means we will depart someone, and then that person will arrive. And if that person arrives, that is an effective return. And then whatever happens afterwards is something different. And it's just a way of looking at different ways of monitoring the effectiveness of the programs. Some people are very interested in what happens to that person after they return. And some people are more interested in looking at whether or not travel is successful. It just depends what the parameters are in your particular country.
All right, thank you. I think that was kind of clear enough, at least for me. I hope Elena is satisfied with your reply also. So the next question is in terms of circle migration. Any suggestions for their reintegration upon return during the circle migration cycle? Is it applicable in these terms? Does it work this way?
Of course it does. Of course it does. And circular migration, I mean, if I had another bullet point on the major operational challenges for the program, it would be circular migration. And it's a way of referencing the uncontrollable factors in the country of return. And like I said during the presentation, it doesn't matter if you've got a really, really good program, you can't control things like civil conflict, inflation, job availability. These are the things that, well, safety for your family, opportunities for women, the list will go on and on. And you can't control that. So yes, there is a role in offering assistance to people, and that could be individual assistance, or it could be community-based assistance. And there's some really, really great programs out there that connect both individual with community assistance. But circular migration will always be there. And there's no way that, well, I don't believe there's no easy way to beat it.
All right, thank you. So there is one more question coming from Elena. She wants to know whether you know anything about the results of the return and reintegration program in Afghanistan over the last 15 years, and the specifics of the return and integration program in Turkey and Afghanistan.
Okay, all right. Well, I mean, both countries are very close to my heart. I love Afghanistan because there's a lot of opportunity to work with some great service partners in Afghanistan. For those of you who have worked in Afghanistan or know a lot about Afghanistan, you'll also know that's a very challenging market. So you've got threats of corruption, you've got inflation, you've got high taxes. You've got threats from the Taliban, you've got security threats as well, and it all makes doing business quite expensive and quite challenging. So my insights from working with Afghanistan is that it really pays to have a great service partner or a network of service partners in Afghanistan, and that means that Afghans, they lead the dialogue that you have to have with government. They lead the discussions that you have about opportunities for recipients. And yes, there's certainly some great partners out there, some international organizations who can provide some really, really good responses. In Turkey, so Turkey is also a challenge. So Turkey is hosting a large amount of Syrian refugees at the moment. So there is So there's I suppose an internal migration challenge, and then there's the outward migration challenge where Turkey is also working with high volumes for returns to countries like Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and yes, there is a functioning returns program in Turkey, and that program works with Turkish Red Crescent in some countries of return to provide assistance post-arrival.
Thank you. I see two quite similar questions that are kind of a best question. What is the best assisted voluntary return program and why? And another one, could you give us the practices on the sustainable return, some good practices here?
What is the best?
What is the best in your opinion?
What is the best? We want to know the best. And I knew this would happen. I knew this would happen. It's not an easy answer, and I know that's not the answer you're looking for. But honestly, it's not an easy answer to say the best. So there's some really, really great programs out there. Let me just talk objectively about the best. So the German program has been one of the longest standing programs in the world. It has a great relationship with a great operational partner. It is a multifaceted program. It's very well designed, and it accommodates the needs of a lot of departures. Another program I can think of off the top of my head is the UK program. The United Kingdom is very, very good at in-housing solutions. So the UK has in-housed and then outsourced and then in-housed again. And again, working with a lot of different caseloads, a lot of different challenges, and providing some very, very innovative results as well. I think I've got to provide a shout out to my Scandinavian colleagues as well. So I believe the Norwegian and the Swedish programs are also very good as well. The Swedes are building some great initiatives in Asia, in Afghanistan, for instance. And then my Norwegian colleagues, I don't think I'm giving away any secrets by saying that that they've got a long working relationship with initiatives in the Horn of Africa as well. So when we say best, sometimes the best programs move a lot of people, and that could be its operational strength. And then other programs are the best because they've got really well designed programs. So it just depends where you sit on that continuum.
And how about the sustainable return? Are there any good practices here?
Mm-hmm. So I think there's some great well-designed programs that are out there. So the one that immediately comes to mind is a GIZ program, and I describe it as a bookend program, where people they commence vocational training in Germany prior to departure, and then that person completes their vocational training in their country of origin once they return. So that's I think it's a great way of saying that the commitment to that person, it has to start while they're in the host country. And I can hear some of you saying that, yes, okay, well, if we invest in that person before they depart, what are the chances that they don't go? And that really depends on the policy setting. So participants for that program are very purposefully selected. And yeah, like I said, a commitment before departure and a strong commitment post-arrival. That's what immediately comes to mind.
All right, thank you. We have a kind of question on your expertise. In which countries do you work specifically or have worked? What experience do you have in these terms? And where did you return the returnees, basically? With which countries on the other side do you cooperate? And another question, do you cooperate with Frontex as well? Okay,
all right, sure thing. So, so a bit about me, or a little bit more about me, is that I used to work on this program called ERIN, and so I used to work for ICMPD. I still work for ICMPD, and ERIN built solutions for 16 member states, and at that time we had the ability to assist returns and reintegration assistance to 19 countries of return. So all the details about the countries that that we worked with are on the website, and I'm happy to provide that web address through Prague Process colleagues. But my area of expertise was Asia. So Afghanistan, Pakistan. I was going to say Af and Pak, but Afghanistan, Pakistan, Sri Lanka. That was where I did a lot of my work. So building solutions in Afghanistan, working with operational challenges, and then also it was exciting to work in Pakistan as well. So inflation and taxes are a huge challenge for returning Pakistani nationals, and there were some great initiatives via great service partners in Pakistan to say, okay, all right, so what is required to earn an income for someone returning to Pakistan, and we built some great solutions there as well. So that's what I did for a long time. What I'm doing right now is that I'm involved in discussions for building durable solutions in Ethiopia, and then broader in the Horn of Africa. So there's a returns consortium that we're looking to establish in Addis Ababa and assist through East Africa. And then as part of my ICMPD work, I've also provided advice to the Turkish Director General of Migration Management for the establishment of their national assisted voluntary returns program. Oh, and the Frontex thing, the Frontex thing. So do I cooperate with Frontex? No, I am not connected to Frontex in any way. I'm ICMPD through and through.
Thank you, Glenn. Thanks a lot. A good few points about your expertise. Maybe our colleagues would be interested to cooperate with you as well. So I see quite an interesting question coming from Elena. Another one, what are the concrete mechanisms of a policy and program control over their AVRR? Yeah.
So is it policy?
What are
What's
the mechanisms of policy and program control over the programs on return and integration? And who controls? Government, NGOs, international organizations?
Sure. So my view, and it's only my view, is that government should control policy settings. And so as part of the presentation, I said that it's a valuable exercise for government to take a step back and say, what do we want the program to do? What are the caseloads that we need to move? And how does the program need to function? And without a doubt, there's a political objective as well. So high level in government will decide, okay, so return is a priority for us, and we want to be able to travel any person anywhere in the world at any time, or something like that. I mean, they could be really, really broad parameters, or it could be really specific as well. So government has to decide how the program wants to work, and then that informs the policy framework. Now, when the policy starts to work, you get into program design. And so some member states have chosen not to work with an external organization and preserve that control from end to end. And if you can do that, I think it's a really, really good way of maintaining control. However, there's a lot of member states who work with a donor or who work with an external organization and a donor to determine how their programs will work. And my major point is that it's super important for that government to say their original plan for the program, it has to be visible once the program starts to work. You shouldn't allow for those aspects to be compromised, particularly if it doesn't allow you to achieve all your objectives.
Okay, thank you. So we now have a question about their statistics on effectiveness. Mm-hmm. Our listener mentions that in his opinion, the effectiveness is a percentage between the number of migrants that use the program and the number of the same migrants detained in the EU once again. So basically they are returning back. Could you elaborate a little bit on that? Is there any statistics that countries collect for the return programs, and how effective is that?
Yes, there are statistics, but I'm wandering into dangerous territory by commenting on behalf of member states. So an objective way to say it is to say, yes, there are statistics, and there's no doubt that member states, they measure the effectiveness of their programs in certain ways. So for instance, I'm just thinking out loud here to say those that have been given a returns decision and those that actually travel. So there could be a success rating that says of those that are available to travel, how many actually traveled. But other member states will record it differently, but that's a high level measure of success.
Well, statistics is difficult in all terms. I think in migration, there is no clear statistics whatsoever. We've been struggling with that issue for many, many years ourselves. And we have an interlinked question coming from IOM. First of all, thank you, IOM, for participating in today's webinar. We got a comment that IOM has developed a framework for assisted voluntary return and reintegration, and they have some perfect handbooks on that issue. So you can definitely find that online, I'm sure, on that. And then Sasha from IOM office in Vienna has two questions. Could you tell anything about the nexus between return and research? And the second point, what is your take on return programs and addressing vulnerabilities? Okay, all right. Thanks a lot, Sasha. We've had some great chats over the past, and it's great to see you on the call. The Nexus, I think everybody loves a good Nexus. And we were talking, I remember when we were in Budapest, we were talking about the Nexus between migration and debt, a very, very interesting topic. And so the Nexus between return and research, undoubtedly there is a Nexus. And there's been a lot of literature that's been produced by some really, really smart people on how return migration plays a role in someone's onward migration. So one thing that I know that's out there that's produced by IOM is to say that migration is just part of life for some people. And
maybe it's not a nexus between return and research, but more of a nexus between return and someone's ability to further migrate. So we're talking about freedom of movement. We're talking about someone's ability to move and seek safe haven where they need to, and sometimes that's very important. It's also important for those people to sometime return to their home country and to attend a family, or to start a new business, or to reconnect with their home country as well. So I think if we were to chase a nexus, I think we'd be able to find a lot of good topics as well. Irina, can you remind me of the second part of Sasha's question?
Of course. So the second part is about vulnerabilities. What is your take on return programs in addressing certain vulnerabilities of migrants, definitely, that are having?
No problem. So this is one of those things that there wasn't enough time to talk about this, but it's a very important side topic. So return programs and assessing vulnerabilities. There are people who will seek assistance to return that do have certain vulnerabilities. Now, vulnerability is a very, very specific term, and the definition of vulnerability will differ from member state to member state. So there's some member states, for instance, that will have a setting in their returns program specifically for female-headed families, to say that this person is vulnerable for these reasons. The age of the children that is cared for by that woman also might increase that person's vulnerability on return. And there has to be enough of a program setting to say that enough information is collected about that person prior to departure, and then there's enough immediate support and a great support network that's available to that person post-arrival. So I think it's a great point, Sasha. I think we couldn't build these programs without an emphasis on vulnerabilities as well.
Thank you. So another question is coming from OECD and Jonathan, a very specific one about the dropout between agreeing to accept AVRR and actual departure, and between return and showing up at the partner to start claiming in-kind services. Is this a relevant issue, or does it undermine program sustainability?
It's a great question as well. I'm really glad that Jonathan's on the call. Hi, Jonathan. Thanks a lot for your question. Yes, it is a factor, but it's part of the program. And so I mentioned the voluntary engagement parts of the program that are commonplace across all assistance modules. And so at any time that recipient is engaged with the program, because of the voluntary nature of the program, that person can step away. And it might be a direct choice to step away from the program. There might be something happening in that person's life that has them step away as well. So no doubt there are colleagues on the call that have worked with clients where as part of a case management cycle, the recipient will step in and engage, and then something will happen and there's no way of predicting it, and they will step out of the program. And that's just what happens. Now, dropout rates are a very, very harsh way of analysing engagement, but it does happen. And sometimes it happens because a recipient is happy with the assistance that's provided. And so even if a person is due to receive travel assistance and post-arrival assistance, there are travellers who say, once I'm home, I want to be left alone. And so that person will elect not to receive the reintegration assistance or the post-arrival assistance. There's also programs that, for instance, offer immediate cash assistance. And then if that person stays involved in the program, that more assistance is available. And a recipient might decide that the short-term cash assistance is enough for them at that moment, and they might choose to actively disengage from the program. Dropout rates, though, are something that member states would be interested in knowing, because it informs the reporting that they offer to their parliamentarians, and then also informs future program design. So again, another great question.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your reply. So we have an interesting question. I think you already touched upon that government should control return and reintegration programs. And a question coming from Pakistan. In your opinion, should reintegration programs be implemented by profit or non-profit organizations?
And again, I thank the person who asked this question. Sajil, hello, thanks very much. It's great to have you on the call, and it's a great question. I think the best way to answer this question is to say that traditionally, it's not-for-profit organisations that are active in this space. However, that doesn't permit for-profit organisations to do work in this space as well. It really depends on how the member state wants to design their program, and then what kind of partner that they're looking for to administer that assistance. And so there might be a factor when choosing a partner to say, well, our program settings don't permit that partner to draw a profit from administering this assistance. And it means that some for-profit organisations register as not-for-profit organisations, and they continue doing the work. But again, it's a decision of the member state. Another factor is the conditions in the country of return. And so I know that there are some really challenging countries that some member states are choosing to work in. And sometimes it's really hard to find a suitable service partner. And therefore the criteria for service partners has to be broadened to include for-profit organisations.
Thank you very much. And I think that I have one last question, so we're quite on time. Oh, actually we got another one. Yeah, but first let me ask that one. Could you a little bit elaborate more further on how the Prague process could contribute to enhancing return and reintegration programs across the participating states?
Okay, all right. Well, it's an answer that's inspired by another ICMPD process dialogue, and so some member states might already participate in the Budapest process. And what ICMPD does really well is that they manage some great migration dialogues. And what I'd like to see, and again, it's just my view, is for ICMPD to work with willing member states on topics that are of collective interest. So that means that some member states might share some ideas amongst themselves and engage with the Prague process to say, well, we'd really like to explore joint solutions in a particular country of return. So I mentioned Ethiopia. Ethiopia is really hot at the moment, or it might be looking at joint solutions in Afghanistan, or it might be looking for joint solutions in Tunisia. I mean, it's really up to the member states. And so ICMPD could play its normal role where as part of Prague process dialogues, there's the opportunity to design something specifically for member states. So I remember talking to the Budapest process about a project that could be called the Blueprint. And the Blueprint would say to willing member states, what do you want to see as part of a joint solution? And it doesn't have to be an operational solution. It can just be an information exchange to say, we've had some great success working with this particular partner for this particular product or solution. And this may be of interest to other member states. And if there are a small amount of member states that want to continue that dialogue, maybe there could be something great that comes out of it. My view of Prague process member states is that there's a large opportunity to do something for Balkan states, particularly Western Balkan states, and that either means informing the next step or informing the future of their programs, but then also informing how those member states can take greater control of their own return and reintegration program. So that's a big statement, but it's really up to the member states about what happens next.
Yeah, it's about a dialogue, yeah, right? It's always about talking and agreeing on something. So we got actually another 2 questions. One is coming from Eva. I'd like to start with this one. What is your opinion on cooperation with the civil society in the countries of origin with regard to return and reintegration programs? Do you see it feasible to make them independent source of information on how the situation is in the country of origin and inform potential returnees? And are there successful projects on using returnees as an information source for potential returnees?
Yes. So I can start by saying that without a doubt, there's role for civil society organisations. There's another layer to consider here is that it depends on whether the member states want to work directly with those civil society organisations, or they choose a bigger partner, an international organisation, and the civil society organisations are part of the local network for that organisation. My suggestion would be it's the latter solution. So depending on budget, on volume, and on the objectives for the program in that particular country, I would say that the best solutions come from working with a partner that has a good network, including local civil society organisations. Are there successful programs using returnees as an information source for potential returnees? Yes. In fact, it's commonplace to find that some people who have been a recipient of the return process, that they do find work in the international organisations administering this assistance. So yes, that is a commonplace example.
Thank you. And we got our last question that's specific to Kazakhstan. Do you know anything about the return programs in Kazakhstan? And what is your assessment of the sustainability and effectiveness of the return and reintegration programs, specifically in Kazakhstan? And over the 30 years, Elena mentions that there has been specific programs returning ethnic Kazakhs called Oralmans. Is ethnicity the only criteria to differentiate between the repatriation and return and reintegration programs?
Okay, so the second part of that is easier than the first, and the reason why you may have seen me shuffling with papers and things in front of me is I was looking for my notes on Kazakhstan, and I can't find them. But I'm happy to continue the conversation later. The little bit I do know is that there's a lot of emphasis on labour migration in that part of the world. I remember looking at Tajikistan in particular, and looking at the support networks that were available for men who were working in Russia and then had to return. I don't know that much more about it, so I'm open to suggestions. The second part of that is easy for me to answer. Ethnicity, it may form part of a policy parameter for return and reintegration assistance. It may. It really depends. It really depends on how the program's designed. So some member states will choose nationality as a way of saying there's a certain program available for Afghans and then another program available for Iraqis, for instance, or different amounts of assistance because the service partner provides different outcomes in those particular countries. So ethnicity would be part of the decision-making process or the policy-making process for some member states, but there would be other factors as well.
Thank you for this clarification to Elena. About diaspora organizations, how do you view diaspora organizations in the member states to work with return and reintegration as a complementary measure, right, to the state agencies? And do you have any examples on that? Yeah,
so Hugo's asked this question, and it's great because I know that Diaspora organisations form a large part of the Swedish service landscape. So Hugo, it's great to have you on the call. Thanks a lot for the question. I think Diaspora organisations in the host country provide a great way of reaching people who aren't having a good time in a host country. There's certain advantages that Diaspora communities have over government and over civil society organisations, and they're able to connect with people through churches, supermarkets, mosques, and that connection is better than reading a leaflet on a website, for instance. Yes, so Sweden has some great examples, but the example that I'm going to provide is from Belgium. Fedisol does some great work with Moroccan communities, and they did a program not too long ago where they had officers that were specifically employed to engage with the Diaspora organisations. And Hugo, I dare say the same thing exists in Sweden, but it's a way of saying that there are member states who invest heavily in the pre-departure stage. And I think linking with Diaspora via outreach and via information sessions, or just sitting and having regular morning teas with community leaders, I think it's a great way of building connections with that particular community.
Thank you. So we're just on time. I think that's our last question, and then we will gonna close up their session that concerns the voluntary return programs. And could you tell whether there are cases when returnees need to fulfill certain conditions at a place of return?
Well, certainly not as part of the return journey. So voluntary return should be entirely voluntary, and that means that the only thing that person has to satisfy is an identity requirement. And usually, if that person is at a stage where they have resigned themselves to the return decision, it's quite an easy process to support that person in their journey home. As far as the post-return assistance goes, I know some member states require verification of identity when that person applies for assistance or engages with a service partner in the country of return. But then the other fulfillments would be administrative. So if that person receives money for a particular activity, so if, for instance, if that person's supported to buy some goods or some services as part of their reintegration assistance, they have to fulfill the administrative procedure by providing receipts and invoices to demonstrate that the money that they're claiming is actually the money that they've spent. But that forms part of standard program settings. There is nothing particularly new or challenging about that. The other thing to say is that if someone has to fulfill some specific conditions that disadvantage their return or reintegration, that's a problem. And the process should be free of any disadvantage for it to work as best as it possibly can.
Thank you very much, Glenn. Thank you. You replied perfectly to all the questions, I hope. So if our participants, our listeners have additional questions, you may always drop an email to us and we're gonna collect it and reply in written. I would like to invite Alex back to the screen.
Thank you, Glenn. I think the Q&A session actually provided an opportunity to also see the depth of your expertise and also all the geographic weight of your expertise. So thanks for addressing all these questions. It was very interesting, and I would like to actually invite our listeners to fill out a short poll on how they liked today's webinar. It helps us to improve in the future, and this also brings me to announcing our next webinar, which shall take place on 22nd of October, in a bit over 2 weeks from now, and it will be on the EU's new Pact on Migration and Asylum. We are very happy to have an official from the European Commission who was also partially responsible for the issuing of the pact, and she will tell us more about this new policy document that is, of course, also framing the Prague process cooperation. As said before, Glenn will share the links to the country websites together with his presentation. You will receive those in a follow-up email. And we are very much looking forward to Glenn's policy brief, which shall appear on our website probably in about a month. And also to collaborating further with Glenn. I was glad to see that he knows some of our listeners already, and probably this will not be the last time that we have him featuring here with us. I would like to thank all of you for staying with us for these 1.5 hours. I personally learned a lot, and I'm very grateful to Glenn for being with us, and I hope to see you again in about 2 weeks. And thanks for filling out the poll, and have a wonderful day. Goodbye.